Welcome back to the channel, lads and ladies, and you may hear a baby, a mommy, and Sesame Street in the background, but Paralux89 came up with a great question and thought, you know what, I could answer or I could show him through the power of interpretive dance. But I changed my mind and just decided to make a YouTube video instead. So Paralux says, I've played a lot of Baldur's Gate. Good on you, man. Back in the day, so many things look familiar though. I have no clue about the preferable race class combinations. Which race would you suggest for a playthrough as a Sage Sorcerer or Sorcerer in general, and why? Well, if you want the really short answer, anything that gets a bonus to Wisdom would be good as a Sage Sorcerer, I believe. I think it's Wisdom that's their spellcasting stat. Other than that, the field is pretty open, and I'll show you some races and give you an idea. You know what, let's just make this a video on races and classes that work for them. Let's just pretend that oh man, ooh, what is your alignment, kid? You look devious. Alright, so we'll just grab one of those and we'll look at races. There's no stat difference between male and female in this game, so whatever floats your boat. And to start off, human is never a bad choice. Yeah, Guppy? What do you want? You want a bubba? Yeah. Human is never a bad choice. There you go! There you go. Bye-bye. Because you can choose which score to add +2 to. So, for a sorcerer, charisma. For a Sage Sorcerer, Wisdom, and then whatever stat works for you. You can add that bonus to it in character creation. You get a free bonus feat as part of being a human, which can be a huge advantage early game, and that never wears off. Having an extra feat can be better than having +2 to 1 score if you pick the right feat. And then you're also skilled, which means you get an extra skill point every time. So that is really good. You don't have to have as many points in intelligence, or you just get more skills depending upon how you want to shake that out. So long story short, human is good at just about everything. It's not bad, and it's easy to roleplay a human, isn't it? Moving on, elf gets some a few things that are sort of helpful. That +2 to perception is always nice. I personally go by the motto of have as high perception on as many people as possible. Elven magic gives you a little bit better skills as a caster. You can see there. Not gonna make a huge difference, but doesn't hurt. And then elven immunities, again, it can be a little bit of a help. +2 against enchantment spells. And then what else do we have? Elven weapon familiarity is actually one of the reasons that an elf can be a really fun character to play. Now, we'll get into your stat bonuses. You can see up there you get a +2 to dex, -2 con, +2 intelligence. So that would not be the best for a sorcerer, but it could be good for a wizard. However, that elven weapon familiarity is what really makes things fun, because you get a few, as you see, longbows, including composite, longswords, rapiers, short bows, again, including composite version, are all proficient. And anything with the word elven in it instead of being an exotic weapon, such as the elven curve blade, is a martial weapon. And the elven curve blade is a really cool weapon. You'll see that described in some of the duelist abilities and such. And on top of that, roleplay, you get to play as an elf, which is always cool. You live long, you watch these foolish races die off in front of you, and you have some pretty decent abilities. Again, this is not the best for a sorcerer specifically, but with your intelligence and dexterity score, those are two things that you want to have to be fairly high for a lot of builds, so you can get away with having just, say, an 18 charisma, and then bumping up, you know, perhaps your dexterity, and having, well, You don't need to have too much intelligence. Now, Dwarf. This would be a very, very odd character to play as a sorcerer, for example. But these make really solid fighters on account of they get this interesting feat. Their base speed is 20 as opposed to the 30 that most of the other races get, but they don't slow down when they're wearing heavy armor or carrying a lot of weight, so they always move at that base speed. And then of course if you cast something like haste or anything else that augments their movement speed, that still stacks normally. So a dwarf can be a very useful character to wear heavy armor because they don't get any slower than that base speed. You also gain a +4 to your CMD. That's your ability to resist things like bull rush or trip when you're standing on the ground. And guess what? You're always standing on the ground. So you always get a +4 to resist a bull rush or a trip. That's very useful, especially against things like wolves. You are hardy. You get a +2 bonus on saving throws against poison, spells, and spell-like abilities. And there's a feat that increases that. So that is huge. That's 10% to start with against poison and spells. And you can double that with another feat. So that's a 20% advantage over everyone else. That is huge. If you wanted to build a monk with a dwarf, that would work just fine because they are not a small player. So you get normal medium size fist damage, and that comes in later. But as a sorcerer or a mage, well, they're not exceptional, but it would be really interesting to come up with why or how you became a sorcerer or a mage. Dwarves tend to be anti-magic, as it were. They get defensive training against giants, +4, that's a 20% dodge bonus against giants, and that comes in handy in this game. You do end up fighting giants significantly, especially in one chapter. So this is not a bonus you will never get a benefit out of. Hatred, orcs, and goblinoids, you get a +1 on attack rolls against orcs and goblinoids. Again, you will be encountering those. Keen senses, +2 to perception, that's always helpful. And dwarven weapon familiarity, you get proficiency with battle axe, heavy pick, and warhammers, and treat anything with dwarven in its name as a martial weapon. That means that even if you are that dwarven sorcerer, which would be hilarious. Actually, as a sage sorcerer, you get a +2 wisdom. That's actually a fantastic class to choose as sage sorcerer. So, keep that in mind. Dwarf could be the coolest of sage sorcerers. That's so cool that we're just going to jump ahead into dwarf here. Go to sorcerer and click on Sage Sorcerer. Now, of course, anytime you end up having a massive wisdom score, as we're going to have as the Sage Sorcerer, you're always tempted to take one level of Monk. And you know what? I think that's not a bad idea. But let's look at making a level 1 character. I just came up with this, right? This is hilarious. And this character could be a dwarf from this image. Just broaden that nose and that forehead out a little bit, and you can pretend that's a dwarf. But we definitely want to max out wisdom because it's intelligence that's our spellcasting stat. I'm an idiot. So you would need an Empyreal Sorcerer to make that wisdom stat work for you. I got those confused. Yeah, the Empyreal Sorcerer, there we go. Wisdom is our spellcasting stat, and we just want to bump that up. So everything that I just said is wrong. You want the intelligence stat for a sage sorcerer. I was thinking Imperial. So you take an Imperial Sorcerer level, maybe take a level of Monk, and then keep on going in Imperial Sorcerer, or maybe never take a level of Monk and just not have a fantastic armor class. That's up to you. But you definitely want that wisdom high, and then whether or not you put points into other things depends upon how you want to build this sorcerer, and it really is up to you. Charisma I would consider to be a dump stat. You're going to have a bad persuade and use magic device, but really that's all the downside to this that you'll have. Except you do need to keep in mind that if you take 5 points of charisma drain, you'll die. So maybe have that, just bumped up to 6, or maybe not. It's up to you. But what else would I put points into? You know what? I'm just thinking of a crazy build here. What if we have a 13 intelligence, 12 con, that seems pretty reasonable, and then we're just going to give ourselves as much strength. Let's actually drop con down to 10 and give ourselves a 16 strength. Yeah, that could do. What do we see there? Never mind. Honestly, that build is a little bit wild. We'll just put points in Constitution and do we want... it might be a waste for us to have 13 intelligence as well. And this would be like a pure spellcaster dwarf. Is just con and maybe a few points in dex because we can. And there we go, a few points in intelligence again, just because we can. So now we have 3 skills we can use. Knowledge, Arcane. Lore, Religion would be really strong for us. And then even though it's a cross-class skill, Perception. Those seem pretty good. So, not the strongest, but you'll be using your spells to do the damage for you, and you'll of course have to rely on your party, as you always do in Pathfinder Kingmaker. So that's one build for an Empyreal Sorcerer. But let's look at the Sage Sorcerer. So let's go back to a class or a race that would work a little bit better for Sage Sorcerer. I just did this Dwarf thing because I thought, wow, how cool would that be? But to get back to races and the classes that work for them, we have the Gnome, which gets a con bonus and a charisma bonus and a strength penalty. So, Gnomes make fantastic sorcerers for several reasons. You get keen senses, again, +2 on perception, that's not bad at all. Hatred, reptilian humanoids, you get a bonus against them. You're not going to be using that very often, but there's a few times. Defensive training against giants, we've talked about that, it's a great ability. Illusion resistance, +2 on saving throws against illusion spells and effects. You might use that a little bit, but often you don't have to roll a saving throw against a lot of the illusion magic in this game, so that would be irrelevant. No magic, +1 to the DC of any saving throws against illusion spells that you cast, so your illusion spells are a little bit harder to resist. That can be helpful. There's a few illusion spells that have a saving throw, such as Phantasmal Horror, and if you really spec into save DC for illusion, you can kill things like crazy with that ability. Obsessive, +2 on Knowledge World, and slow movement. You are a small sized character, and that's one thing that's not mentioned here. You get a bonus to your AC and a bonus to hit creatures that are larger than you. And that includes just about everybody because your size is small. Also, if you cast Reduce Person on yourself or have it cast on you, your size becomes tiny, where you get even bigger bonuses to your armor class and to hit creatures that are a certain number of size categories larger than you. This can come in very handy on account of you can use your size advantage to have a better chance to hit. It ends up being a 10% difference. 5% better to hit and 5% better armor class. One on one side and one on the other. Why do I mention that? Well, it comes in handy for martial classes. But at least you get a AC bonus if you wanted to go into a spellcaster class. With a con and charisma bonus, you're going to do well in any of the caster classes that use charisma, such as Paladin, who considered a gnome paladin to be a thing. That could be very interesting. But also the base sorcerer class. Let's go back to class here. The base sorcerer uses charisma, as does the Sylvan sorcerer. And keep in mind that Sage uses intelligence and Empyreal uses wisdom. So sorcerer, good. Bard, good. And also, Bard does have a few sorcerer or a few illusion spells that you'll benefit, and it's just a +1. But again, these things start piling up if you want to focus on them. And then also, if you wanted to be a rogue eldritch scoundrel, this is an intelligence-based caster, I believe. However, you don't get a penalty to intelligence, and that bonus to constitution is always handy. The penalty to strength isn't really going to hurt you, and once again, your illusion spells are going to be all the better. So for roleplay reasons, it could be fun to be an eldritch scoundrel as a gnome, as it could for a halfling. So halflings are legendarily sneaky. Anything that uses stealth or agility in general, you see with that dexterity bonus, is going to benefit from being halfling and also from that small size. Having small size gives you a +4 to your sneak automatically, so you're going to be much more stealthy than anything else, and you can even use that as a spellcaster because you also get a bonus to charisma. So halflings make fantastic sorcerers. You're not going to worry about that strength penalty because you get a bonus to charisma, and as a spellcaster you don't really need to worry about that. In fact, this strength penalty, once you have a decent amount of feats and equipment under your belt, you really don't have to worry about at all, because you can just put points into dexterity and be able to deal physical damage that way. But if you're going to be a caster, my recommendation would be to put points into, say for a sorcerer, just max out charisma, and then put your extra points in perhaps dexterity, or maybe a few in constitution, just so you can soak a little bit of damage. It's really up to you. The main thing as a caster is to max out that casting score. So because you get a bonus to charisma, we're talking sorcerer, or let's see, what's it called? Scion. Yeah, so if we go to your class, you go to Magus, and the Eldritch Scion also uses charisma. As I mentioned before, does the Bard and the Paladin. Of course, Paladin's a martial class, but keep that in mind. So generally halflings, they're good at being sneaky, but if you want to go for some kind of caster, anything that uses charisma, you get that charisma bonus and just max out that charisma. Any kind of caster, max out your primary casting stat. What else do we have? Half-elf follows basically the same rules as a human, except instead of the bonus feat and the skilled, you get keen senses, +2 to spot, or perception, elven immunities, which again we've talked about that one, somewhat helpful, and adaptability. You get skill focus as a bonus feat. So all in all, they're a little bit more, oddly enough, elven feeling, but you get that same balance that the humans have. And besides that, look at how cool your character model is. You get sort of the sturdier human features, and then the pointy ears that are oh so essential for having a cool roleplay. And speaking of roleplay, half-elves are really fun to play as, just because you get that mix of cultures, and you're naturally someone who doesn't quite fit in the world, so it's always fun to find your own place, or to build one by strength of your character, strength of your arm. And just like humans, you get to choose which ability score you give +2 to. So let's go ahead and show how that works. So let's pretend that we're going for an Eldritch Scion here. You know what, actually, because the question was on the Sage Sorcerer, which is intelligence based, we're going to choose down here to put our bonus on intelligence. We have no need for wisdom, although it does give us some will saves. No need for charisma, even though as a half-elf I would want to play a high charisma character just for roleplay reasons. But what we really need is all of the intelligence, so we'll put all our points in there up to 20. That's essential. And then we get to decide, do we want to put points in dexterity, give us just a little bit better of a reflex save and armor class, even though we're probably not going to have fantastic reflex saves or armor class, or do we want to put some points in constitution? And you could even put a few, we do have a bunch of intelligence, that's right. So with this build, if we put a few points in dexterity, That's a fairly balanced character. And, you know what? We could salvage our charisma if we wanted to, but let's go ahead and keep that low and just count on other people to speak well for us. And then continuing to put... Let's just put one more point in dexterity, just because we can. And then I would just continue to put points into intelligence, and the 15 dex and the much higher than 13 intelligence is going to unlock some feats like combat expertise that you might consider taking. Defensive fighting and combat expertise can raise your armor class in melee combat, so if you find yourself in that situation, or perhaps you put a point into mobility. And then what else would we want to point in? We already have lore religion, which we don't need. Perception, you know what? It's not the worst idea. A lot of skills here are going to be cross-class. Knowledge arcana. So we got 2 more skills. We put one in a mobility. And then, gee, it's just the skills on this one are kind of garbo. So maybe I would put a point in stealth, just in case, and knowledge world. There we go. So that's a build. It's not the best for roleplay, but in terms of combat, it's kind of strong. So that is a thing. If we wanted to be a different class, we could definitely, again, be anything we want to with the half-elf and not really suffer. Half-orc, same deal. You're half-human, so you get... skilled, you get +2 to ability score of your choice. So again, you can be whatever you want with this and not really suffer. But it definitely focuses on martial prowess because you get intimidating, +2 to intimidate. That's going to be good for a barbarian specifically, or anybody that uses power attack and Cornigon Slash, I think it's called. It's a feat you unlock after power attack, and it's something to consider. Orc weapon familiarity, and again, a +2 is pretty good, especially since it's going to stack with things like skill focus. Orc weapon familiarity, it works just like the elven and dwarven ones, except it gives you proficiency with great axes and falchions, a two-handed fighter, huh? And you treat any weapon with the word orc in its name as a martial weapon. And orc ferocity, this is an interesting one. It's the equivalent of the die hard feat. And when you get knocked down below 0, instead of falling down immediately, you can fight for one more round. And that gives you enough time to deal a little bit more damage, but again, you're still fighting, so you can still take hits. People will still target you oftentimes. And so the downside to this ability is it can get you killed. But the upside, yeah, Tank Baby is furious with me because I didn't give her Mommy's soda. I'm just going to move this over here and give you a distraction. Look at that bag. Look at that. Yeah, that's a diversion. I love you. Yeah, she is not pleased with my diversion. So let's wrap this up. Half-orc's good at just about everything. Orc ferocity can be good in a melee combat that's really close, or it can get you killed. I don't know if I trust that ability. Aasimar is the strongest class in the game, or the strongest race in the game, and I'll show you why. So, once you choose Aasimar, you choose your heritage. Standard Aasimar gets a +2 to wisdom and charisma and a bunch of other stuff. That's pretty good. Angel Kin, Angel Blooded, gets a +2 to strength and charisma. That's fantastic for a paladin. An Angel Kin paladin can be really strong, or anybody again that uses the charisma stat, bards, sorcerers. That'll definitely help you out. Emberkin, +2 to intelligence and charisma. Can you see what they'd be good for? Anything that uses that intelligence stat. Most casters, most of the mage-style casters, and most of the maguses. And then +2 charisma. We talked about the classes that use that. Sorcerer, Bard, Paladin, and a few other exceptional ones. You could be the Idilkin, +2 to charisma and constitution. Again, fantastic for a sorcerer. This is probably the strongest sorcerer class in general, but it doesn't necessarily have a huge advantage over other classes, and it could actually fall, say, 5% behind a gnome in the illusion school. So that's just something to keep in mind. All around, it may be the strongest sorcerer race, but there's definitely some things that can keep up with it. And then I haven't mentioned that you get this spell-like ability you can use once per day. And have you noticed something? Each one of these Aasimar builds, or bloodlines you might say, heritages, they get a +2 to 2 scores and no penalty. So they're just better. They're just straight up better than the standard races of the game, and you can build just about anything out of them. And I haven't mentioned yet that at level, I believe it's level 10, you unlock the ability to choose wings as a feat, which gives you a bonus to your dodge AC and the ability to ignore ground-based effects, such as difficult terrain. And also, I believe there's sharp rocks that you can get from that one spell. Muse Touch, +2 Dex and Charisma. Again, that can be fantastic for certain builds of Paladin. If you want to be a Dex-based Paladin, that's totally a thing you can do. And also, obviously, Sorcerers. And the Plume Kith, +2 to Dexterity and Wisdom, and +2 on Mobility and Athletics checks. And you can cast Invisibility once per day. As a caster of your character level. That's really awesome. Can you imagine this one for a monk? To get +2 to your dex and wisdom, and on top of that +2 to mobility and athletics, 2 skills that monks should make a high use of. I picture a monk as the kind of character who attacks in the second wave and then runs straight to the enemy's back row and starts taking down their softest targets. Bards, sorcerers, wizards, those kinds of people, alchemists, those people that can cause some serious trouble for you. You run up to them, you knock them down, and you just start pummeling with your fists. So that's how I picture a monk. And this Plumekith, Garuda-blooded Aasimar is probably the strongest race for that kind of idea. So that has been a very unstructured look at races and the classes that work for them. We definitely focused on the Sorcerer, talking about how that relates, but hopefully you get the idea that you get some small bonuses that stick with you. So if you really want to maximize your ability, then you'll pick one race or the other. And Aasimar overall is just straight up better than everybody else for a few reasons. And beside that, you get metallic looking skin and hair, and that's kind of cool. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye bye.